A priest stands in the desert sand, his hands sticky with the blood of a goat. He looks at a wall of woven fabric. We treat it as a tragic necessity of the ancient world, an old covenant problem that Jesus eventually arrived to solve. A voice echoes like thunder over the river. A spirit descends like a dove. The divine presence touches the dirt. Heaven has breached the quarantine. The unshielded presence of God has stepped out of the Holy of Holies and into the contaminated water of a broken world. The boundary between heaven and earth is not just pushed aside, it is fractured. This is the first time the word schizo appears in the Gospel of Mark, and it is a massive literary setup. Because Mark only uses this exact verb one other time in his entire account, he saves it for exactly 14 chapters later. On a Friday afternoon, when the carpenter is nailed to a piece of wood, but between the tearing of the sky and the tearing of the temple veil, the physical barrier in Jerusalem undergoes a terrifying, man-made upgrade. The fabric God commanded Moses to weave in the desert is long gone. The ancient, the portable tabernacle has been replaced by towering stone. The boundary line has been militarized by a paranoid king. What hangs in the temple when Jesus arrives is not just a theological statement. It is a fortress. The stones of the Temple Mount in the 1st century are massive. Some weigh over 300 tons, cut perfectly flush, resting on bedrock. Herod the Great, the paranoid architect of this complex, does not build for theology. He builds for intimidation. But if you look closer at the fibers it was woven from, at the blood pooling on the floor in front of it, inside this architectural monster, the boundary line between heaven and earth has been radically upgraded. The curtain separating the holy place from the Holy of Holies is no longer the portable, sun-bleached fabric of the desert wandering. It has become an industrial-scale fortress. According to early Jewish records, the veil of the Second Temple was 60 feet high and 30 feet wide. It was woven from 72 twisted plaits, each plait made of 24 distinct threads. It was so impossibly heavy that the ancient rabbis claimed it took 300 priests just to immerse it in water for purification. They boasted that if you tied a team of horses to each side and drove them in opposite directions, the fabric would not yield. It is an impenetrable, towering wall of blue, purple, and scarlet. But something else has shifted over those 1,500 years. In the desert, the paroquet was a gracious, terrifying provision to keep a radioactive god from consuming a contaminated camp. It was God holding the space. It was a quarantine designed by heaven. By the time the Roman Empire occupies Jerusalem, the barrier has been weaponized. The religious elite have turned the quarantine into a monopoly. The massive, impenetrable curtain is no longer just a reminder of humanity's exile. At the very specific Hebrew word God chose to name it, you start to see something the boundary line reading completely misses. It is a status symbol. The men who control the curtain control access to the divine. They regulate the sacrifices. They manage the heavy scent of burning frankincense. They oversee the endless flow of warm blood on the cold stone floor. As long as the barrier stands, their mediation is strictly required. The veil is not a tragic necessity to them. It is their source of power. They have built a fortress around the Holy of Holies, convinced that their woven threads, their pure lineages, and their rigid gatekeeping are what hold the world together. They look at the 60-foot fabric, thick as a handbreadth, and see absolute security. No human hand could ever bring it down. No unauthorized person could ever slip past the golden cherubim. But security is an illusion when the occupant of the room decides it is time to leave. The sky was violently torn at a river 30 years ago. Now, the Friday afternoon sun is fading outside the city walls. The ground is beginning to shudder, and the architecture of distance is about to face the one thing its heavy threads cannot absorb. A man suffocates on a wooden beam. A priest stands before a golden altar. Outside the city, the sky turns black at noon. The veil is not an eviction notice. It is a shock absorber. Think about the stakes of what was happening in that desert. The air drops in temperature. A carpenter pulls his weight up on an iron spike. He takes a shallow, agonizing breath. He speaks his final word. His lungs empty. His head falls forward. Inside the city, the ground heaves. The heavy stones of the Temple Mount shudder. Dust falls from the towering ceiling. The priest loses his footing. He drops his silver censer. The golden lampstand rattles violently against the stone floor. And then, a sound cuts through the thick, incense-heavy air of the holy place. It is the terrifying, unmistakable sound of ripping fabric. Mark chapter 15 records the exact moment. The exact same Greek verb from the baptism at the river returns. Schizo, the massive veil of the temple, is violently cleaved in two. The woven faces of the cherubim, the angelic guards who have stood at the threshold of the presence since Eden, are split straight down the middle. But the detail that carries the weight of the universe is the direction of the tear. Mark specifically notes that it rips from top to bottom. Think about the sheer physics of a 60-foot curtain. If a mob of angry protesters stormed the Temple Mount to tear the barrier down, they would start at the floor. They would rip it, from the bottom up. The tear does not start at the floor. It starts near the ceiling, 60 feet in the air, entirely out of reach. If a God of pure, unyielding, radioactive goodness comes into unprotected contact with a species wired for rebellion, the result is not a warm embrace of any human hand or Roman sword. The fabric is not cut by a human hand. It is dismantled by the occupant of the room. For 1,500 years, the paroquet held the boundary. It kept the pure, unshielded presence of God, quarantined from the rot of human rebellion. It was the architecture of distance. But on a Friday afternoon outside the city gates, the rot is finally absorbed. The contamination is cured. The blood of a better sacrifice permanently covers the mercy seat. The quarantine is over. God steps out of the dark room. He does not gently pull the curtain aside. He violently destroys the barrier on his way out. He is never going back into a box built by human hands. The physical boundary line is gone forever. The path into the unmediated presence of God is entirely unobstructed. But if the fabric was violently destroyed 2,000 years ago, why do so many of us still act like it is hanging right in front of our faces? In the year 70 AD, the Roman 10th Legion sets fire to the Temple Mount. The ancient cedar beams collapse in a shower of sparks. The gold plating melts from the extreme heat, running like liquid water into the cracks of the massive foundational stones. And whatever remained of the heavy, woven fabric burns down to fine gray ash, scattered across the Judean hills by the evening wind. The result is incineration. You cannot put a blazing sun inside a cardboard box and expect the box to survive. There is no physical curtain left on Earth. Yet, 2,000 years after the sky was torn at the river and the fabric was violently split at Golgotha, millions of us still live as if the architecture of distance is completely intact. We still construct the veil. We just build it out of different materials. Think about the way we operate in our modern spiritual lives. We walk into dimly lit sanctuaries, the low hum of the microphone carrying through the speakers, and we instinctively treat the stage as the Holy of Holies. We treat pastors, authors, and worship leaders as our high priests. We want them to do the heavy lifting. We want them to step into the terrifying, quiet darkness of the presence of God, hear His voice, and then come back out to the courtyard and report to us what He said. We prefer the mediation because we are still deeply terrified of the proximity. A God kept safely behind a curtain is manageable. A God trapped in a religious routine, kept at a safe distance by our theological frameworks and our behavioral performance, is a God we can appease. But a God who is broken out of the quarantine, a God who stands in the very center of your messy, contaminated, ordinary life, is dangerously unpredictable. We carry a heavy, sinking weight in our chests, convinced that our secret failures and our accumulated shame have disqualified us from drawing near. We act like the quarantine is still active. God wanted to dwell in the center of the camp. The camp could not survive His proximity. This is not an ancient architectural problem, but the barrier keeping you from unmediated intimacy with the Creator is not a divine eviction notice. It is a phantom veil. You are standing outside a room that has no walls. You are honoring a boundary line that God Himself violently destroyed. The blood has already been sprinkled on the floor. The heavy threads of blue, purple, and scarlet have been permanently severed from top to bottom. The veil is not a fabric woven by God to keep you out. It is a psychological barrier constructed by your own fear. When Jesus released His final breath on the cross, He did not just secure a theological status for you. He permanently altered the geography of the cosmos. He made the Holy of Holies completely accessible to the very people who used to be incinerated by its presence. But how do you actually learn to walk into a room you have spent your entire life believing was closed? And what happens when you finally realize that the space where God dwells is no longer a building made of stone? A terrified prophet received blueprints for a heavy barrier in the desert, and a wandering camp survived the divine proximity. A barefoot priest carried warm blood into the dark, and the toxic rot of a nation was temporarily absorbed. A paranoid king built a 60-foot. This is the human condition. We are a species that desperately craves the presence of the divine. Woven fortress and a corrupt priesthood weaponized the distance. A carpenter stepped out of a cold river, and the sky itself violently tore open. A savior suffocated on a Roman cross, and the earth shattered under a blackened sun. An unseen hand gripped the massive veil from the ceiling, and the woven guards of Eden were split down the middle. The presence of God stepped out of the quarantine, and the geography of the cosmos was permanently rewired. One curtain, one tear, one open room. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the woven cherubim, the angelic guards stationed at the gates of Eden with a flaming sword. The same figures stitched in blue, purple, and scarlet thread on the heavy templeve. For 15 centuries, their golden eyes stared down every human who dared to approach, holding the line of our exile. And when that fabric tore from top to bottom, it didn't just break a textile. It meant the guards had been permanently stood down. The exile was over. If you are in a season where God feels distant, where your prayers seem to bounce off an invisible ceiling, or where your own failures make you feel like you belong in the outer courtyard, you need to look at the torn edges of that heavy fabric. The quarantine has been lifted. You do not need to stand in the cold waiting for someone else to mediate the presence of God for you. You do. Yet we are structurally incapable of surviving it, unshielded. The real question of the veil isn't, why did God tear it? Not need to weave a phantom veil out of your own shame. The blood is already on the floor. The way back to the garden is completely open. And may the God who violently destroyed the architecture of distance step out of the shadows and meet you right where you stand. If this broke through a phantom veil for you, hit subscribe and leave a comment. Even one word helps. Share this with someone who is exhausted from standing on the outside. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. It is this: why did He endure the barrier for 1500 years? The answer changes how you read every single interaction. Blue, inwanningsperrt, purple, and scarlet thread, thick as a ship's sail, blocks the entrance to a dark tent between heaven and earth, from Mount Sinai to the cross. It changes how you understand the distance you feel right now. When your prayers seem to bounce off the ceiling, to feel the weight of what happened on that Friday afternoon, you cannot just look at the tear. You have to understand the fabric. And the place to start is at the base of a smoking mountain in the middle of a wasteland, where the exact specifications for this curtain were first handed to a terrified man named Moses. A spool of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn sits beside a pile of fine, twined linen. This is the material list for the boundary line between heaven and earth. God does not command Moses to build a fortress of iron. He does not ask for a wall of unyielding stone. He asks for a textile. But this is not an ordinary piece of drapery. Ancient rabbinic traditions record that the temple veil was the thickness of a handbreadth, nearly 4 inches of dense, tightly packed fabric. If you struck it with your fist, it would not billow or fold. It would absorb the impact with a heavy, deadened thud, like hitting a solid bag of sand. It hung silently on 4 pillars of acacia wood, overlaid with pure gold. 400 years later, a different priest stands on a cold stone floor in Jerusalem. He looks at the exact same pattern, an impenetrable woven wall, dividing the holy place from the terrifying, dark silence of the Holy of Holies. The colors and the materials are not just ancient interior design. They are a theological argument. To the ancient Hebrew mind, the tabernacle was a microcosm of the cosmos. The outer courtyard was the earth. The holy place was the visible heavens, and the Holy of Holies. That perfect, windowless cube in the very back was the unseen realm of God. The tabernacle is not a new building. It is a portable Eden. And if you read the blueprints handed down in Exodus chapter 26, God commands the artisans to weave something very specific into the thick fibers of this barrier. Cherubim, angelic figures stitched directly into the threshold. The last time humanity encountered cherubim in the biblical narrative, the context was catastrophic. In the opening chapters of Genesis, Adam and Eve are exiled from the garden, and God places cherubim with a flaming sword at the eastern gate to guard the way back to the tree of life. The veil is not a decoration. It is the flaming sword woven into fabric. It stands as a constant, suffocating reminder that the way back to unmediated intimacy with the Creator is closed. 1,000 years after that, a high priest stands in Herod's towering temple, his eyes watering from the sharp smoke of burning frankincense. The paradise we were designed to inhabit is sitting just on the other side of that curtain, but our rebellion has made the crossing lethal. The woven cherubim stand guard, their eyes staring down every priest who walks into the room. For 15 centuries, this massive textile hung as the great "not yet" of the human story. Every single day, priests would step into the holy place to replace the bread and trim the lamps. They would feel the warmth of the golden lampstand on their skin. They would smell the sharp, piney scent of burning frankincense. They would watch the flickering candlelight catch the gold thread of the cherubim, staring back at them in the dim room. They were agonizingly close to the raw presence of God. But close is not the same as inside. To survive stepping past those woven angels, you needed more than good intentions. Once a year, one man was allowed to pull back that heavy curtain and walk into the dark. But to survive the crossing, he had to bring something very specific to the stone floor. A man strips off his golden robes. He washes his body in cold water. He dresses in plain, rough white linen. He stands barefoot on the stone floor. He holds a bronze bowl of warm goat's blood. It is the 10th day of the 7th month. He is looking at a curtain so massive, so incredibly dense. Historical records claim it took 300 priests just to lift it. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. He walks toward the massive curtain. He does not hear the familiar chiming of golden bells on his hem. Today, he wears the garments of a servant. Today, the courtyard is completely silent. He carries a censer of burning coals. He carries 2 handfuls of crushed, sweet incense. He reaches the heavy blue, purple, and scarlet fabric. He presses his weight against the cherubim woven into the thread. He slips through the narrow gap into pitch blackness. Immediately, he throws the incense onto the blazing coals. Thick white smoke erupts into the windowless room. It stings his eyes. It fills his lungs. It blankets the golden box in the center of the floor. Leviticus chapter 16 is brutally clear about why he must do this before doing anything else. He must create a cloud of smoke to cover the mercy seat. If he sees the unshielded presence, he dies. He dips his finger into the bronze bowl. He sprinkles the dark red blood on the gold cover. 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. He does this exactly 7 times. The blood is not a bribe. It is a decontamination. 1 object, 1,500 years. You probably know how this story ends. You have probably heard the sermon. Throughout the year, the rebellion, the failures, and the moral rot of the nation accumulate. It builds up like invisible toxic waste, and the pure, radioactive holiness of God sits in the middle of it all, separated only by 4 inches of woven thread. The blood of the goat acts as a ritual detergent. It wipes the sanctuary clean. It absorbs the rot. It resets the proximity. The priest backs out of the room. He lets the heavy curtain fall shut. The barrier is re-established. This happens year after year. A goat dies. The blood spills. A priest washes. The linen goes on. The curtain opens. The curtain falls shut. Generations live and die outside that fabric. Empires rise and fall around the tabernacle and the temple. The Babylonians come and go. The Persians come and go. The Greeks come and go. The Romans arrive. But the protocol never changes. The barrier never permanently moves. The camp survives for 1 more year. God does not break out and consume them. But this terrifying system was never meant to be the final arrangement. It was a holding pattern, a desperate, bloody way to keep a holy God and a fractured humanity in the same geographical space without starting a fire every time that massive textile fell shut with a heavy thud. It whispered a promise. The separation was not a permanent sentence. It was a countdown, about the Friday afternoon outside the city walls. The sky goes black at noon. The earth fractures underfoot. And miles away, inside the quiet. But to truly understand the weight of that countdown, you have to read the original blueprints in the book of Exodus. You have to look at the exact Hebrew word God used to name this fabric. And you have to see the terrifying double meaning hiding inside its roots. Exodus chapter 26. Verse 31. God is standing with Moses on a mountain wrapped in thick smoke, dictating the exact placement of the gold, the silver, and the fine twined linen for the tabernacle. He is handing over the architectural blueprints for how the divine will coexist with the dusty, failing human beings waiting down below. And when he reaches the instructions for the great dividing curtain, he does not use the common Hebrew word for a hanging drape or a tent flap. The word God uses for the veil is the Hebrew paroket. It appears 24 times in the Old Testament, and it is used exclusively to describe this one, singular object, the massive barrier separating the Holy of Holies from the rest of the structure. Its etymology is fascinating. The root of this noun, parek, carries the meaning to separate, to shut in, or to break apart violently. It is not a passive word. It is a word of severe, active division. If watching the layers of this ancient language unfold is making the Bible feel alive in a way it never has before, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Gold-covered sanctuary. That massive temple veil tears violently from top to bottom. Most people assume that curtain was just a spiritual boundary line, because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So the paroket hangs in the dark, functioning as an active mechanism of division. But here is the detail that changes how you read this entire architectural setup. And it goes to the core of how we understand the holiness of God. A quarantine wall does not just protect the outside from what is inside, it protects what is inside from being compromised by the outside. Think about the ancient Hebrew worldview. The entire earth has been contaminated by human rebellion, infected by the slow rot of death and decay. If God is going to establish a beachhead in this ruined world, if he is going to actually set up his throne on the dirt of this planet, he has to carve out a quarantine zone. The Holy of Holies was the 1 cubic space on earth where the corruption of Eden had not penetrated. It was a pocket of unfallen reality. The paroket kept the contamination out, just as much as it kept the lethal, radioactive holiness in. The veil is not God shutting humanity out in anger. It is God keeping a piece of heaven entirely uncompromised. He was holding the space, preserving the sanctuary, waiting for the day when the contamination could be cured and the quarantine could finally be lifted. The paroket was the architecture of distance. It was a heavy, terrible grace, and it worked exactly as designed for 1,500 years. We read it as a woven keep out sign, hung by a perfectly holy God to keep deeply flawed people from walking into the room. But the detail that changes everything about this fabric is what happens when a carpenter walks into a river in the New Testament. A carpenter walks down a muddy bank. He steps into the cold, rushing water of the Jordan River, a wild-eyed prophet, smelling of sweat and wild honey, plunges him under the surface. He breaks the water, gasping for air, river water streaming from his beard. And then, something impossible happens. Mark's gospel does not begin with a quiet manger. It does not begin with a shining star. It does not begin with singing angels. It begins with a violent rupture. In Mark chapter 1, verse 10, as Jesus comes up out of the water, the writer uses a very specific, aggressive Greek verb to describe what happens to the sky above him. The word is schizo. Many English translations say the heavens were opened or parted. That is too polite. The heavens are not opened, they are torn. The verb schizo means to cleave, to split apart with force, to violently divide. It is the root from which we get the medical term schizophrenia, a splitting of the mind. It implies sudden, irreversible damage to a boundary. The sky does not part like gentle clouds clearing after a storm. It rips like a piece of tightly woven fabric.